Recent audits of some big Illinois state agencies not shedding a good light, but necessary light on how things are operating, with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services and the Illinois Department of Corrections being the subject of two recent audits. And what are these audits ultimately saying? Well, they're not filing reports in a timely fashion. While that sounds innocuous on its surface, when you drill down into the types of reports they're not making in a timely fashion, you can see where a lot of these concerns rise. Welcome back, Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. Find me anywhere, just search Bishop on Air. X, formerly known as Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and so on. All right, so we got an adverse opinion. What is an adverse opinion? Well, if we look at the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services audits that the Illinois Auditor General released yesterday, it says in red, adverse opinion. All right, it goes on to say that because of the significance and pervasiveness of the findings described within the report, we, the accountants, expressed an adverse opinion of the department's compliance with the specified requirements which comprise a state compliance examination. And this is of the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. And looking at the summary, I mean, you've got just red marks all over. And really notable is the amount of repeat findings of 23 from previous audits. It goes on to say that an adverse opinion is required when the practitioner, having obtained sufficient appropriate evidence, concludes that misstatements, individually or in the aggregate, are both material and pervasive to the subject matter, meaning that you can't just dismiss this as an accounting error. No, it's so pervasive that they had to give an adverse opinion. And go talk to your auditor friend about what an adverse opinion is. It's not something they just throw around like candy. But in the DCFS audits, the most serious cases involving child death, injury, malnutrition, and sex abuse, DCFS is required to notify local police authorities within 24 hours. Now, the agency, in tests that the Auditor General did, found only 20% of the time did that happen. And in some cases, they waited up to 43 days, according to the audit. So think about that. The Department of Children and Family Services sees a case of abuse, and they're supposed to report it within 24 hours. In some cases, it took them 43 days to report that. In only 1 in 5 cases that they tested, did they actually report the abuse within 24 hours. You've got 2 former DCFS employees that are on trial right now in connection with the death of a 5-year-old child in suburban Chicago. That case is going to resume next month, but they're accused of failing to follow policies within the agency when they returned the boy back to the home where he was later murdered by his parents. DCFS gets 11% boost in his budget, surpassing $2 billion of Illinois taxpayer money. Obviously, DCFS opening the books for the Auditor General, but you've got the likes of State Representative Stephen Reich sounding off, saying that these are problems. These are significant problems at the agency.
You can't continue to make these mistakes and have these kids fall through cracks and not expect there to be downstream effects. These kids are going to end up in the same system in 10, 15 years, and we're going to end up with the same thing.
And he continued on with some of his criticism.
The fact that in some cases it was over 2 years before somebody, going on 3 years before some of these things were done, I think speaks just to the underlying rot that's going on in that agency.
So DCFS has a scathing audit, and again, some of those reports indicating just delays in getting, abuse allegations in front of law enforcement, and something that, taken 43 days in some cases when it's supposed to be done within, 24 hours. But it includes also 96% of cases tested by DCFS. The agency failed to notify a school in a timely manner when credible evidence of abuse was found, and in some cases, not notifying the schools for years. Not the only agency facing an adverse audit. You have the Illinois Department of Corrections not getting an adverse audit, but still having 40 findings carried over from previous audits. So the state's prison system, looking at the compliance audits from the Auditor General, 46 findings, 40 repeat findings, includes a failure to notify victims and local law enforcement after releasing sex offenders, including those who committed a predatory criminal sexual assault of a child, aggravated sexual assault, also certain offenses of aggravated child pornography or manufacture or dissemination of child pornography. So IDOC, according to the Auditor General, not telling local law enforcement in a timely fashion when they're releasing sex offenders. State Representative Dan Calkins, he sounded off on the audits and didn't have positive things to say about the state agencies in
people
general.
in that community would know that somebody is being released back into the general population. I mean, this is just absolute disgraceful. And
he continues with his criticism.
I mean, my first reaction to this is that another state agency, this time the Department of Corrections, is being poorly run.
But it's not just the Department of Corrections and the Department of Children and Family Services. We've seen adverse opinions against the Illinois Department of Employment Security. We've seen other findings in agencies all across state governments, executive state agencies run by Governor J.B. Pritzker. Now, the governor was asked over the summer about adverse opinions and agency findings elsewhere that might not rise to adverse opinions, but still repeat findings after repeat findings. Here's what the governor had to say about audits being conducted by the Illinois Auditor General.
Well, I guess I'd remind you that, there are audits done every year, as you know, and every 2 years on each agency. And within each audit, and I've looked at those audits, what you find is there are some audit findings that repeat year after year. Before I was governor, continue on as governor. You know what? A lot of those have to do with mismatches between the law that was passed some years ago and the way business is done today, just in general. We've brought more efficiencies to a process that don't require certain records to be kept, and yet the law still says, well, you got to, provide a record. Well, if you can't provide a record for something that you're not doing because you don't need to anymore, because we've got computers and other modern conveniences that make it easier. So I wouldn't look at the number or the repetition of some of those so much. We do look to see what are the new ones that get found that we need to address, and then, as you've maybe seen in some of the hearings in the General Assembly, a lot of questions get asked about the old ones, but most especially focused on any new findings. We're addressing them as fast as we can, and I pay attention to that, and our staff in the governor's office works with our agencies to make sure that we're addressing each one of those things.
So the governor saying they look at the audits, and some of them, the findings are because the law is outdated and they're not following those procedures anymore because they got computers and other modern technology. But the new audit findings, he says they do review. Now, the Legislative Audit Commission has a hearing today, and they've got a stack of other audits that they've got to review. So we'll be interested to see what they discuss in the Legislative Audit Commission that's set to meet up in Chicago today. And that commission is equal parts Democrats and Republican, equal parts House and Senate. So it's a bipartisan committee. But there's obviously a lot of eyeballs on these audits and your tax dollars behind the functions of state government agencies. All right, it is Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and